Hi class, this is for interpersonal communication. I'm Professor Barry Brennan, and today we're going to talk about emotions and how we communicate them. And we'll look at how that influences our interpersonal relationships and how the way we express our emotions impacts, affects, influence, and shapes the relationships that we have. So let's start with getting an understanding of what emotions are and how we talk about them. So I like to start off by talking about emotional intelligence. A lot of people really don't know what this basically means, but this guy Goleman, he actually even wrote a book about emotional intelligence, and I'd like you all to take take a moment to watch this video. It's pretty short. But he explains what emotional intelligence is, and basically, not all of us have it. And there are certain qualities that a person has when they have emotional intelligence. And one of the key factors is your ability to monitor yourself, what we call self-monitoring, or another way to think about it is managing your emotions. And while you're managing your own emotions, having sensitivity to others. That can be hard. Right? You can also think of maturity, but people who are emotionally intelligent, they're able, one, they know what they're feeling, so they can manage their feelings. They know how to manage them, meaning take care of themselves, express it when it's appropriate, right? And consider the impact that the expression of that feeling might have on someone. And he also makes this argument in his video that your degree of emotional intelligence is directly correlated to your own self-esteem. So how much value you feel you have, how good you feel about your life. Are you happy? How much you accept yourself, right? Go back to when we talk about Maslow's hierarchies of need, Maslow's hierarchy of need. At the top of that was self-actualization, right? So that has to do with self-acceptance and how able are we to manage conflict with our relationships in a healthy way. All relationships have conflict. It's a normal part of relationships, but what does it mean to be healthy in your conflict management styles? And how do we even have healthy relationships in general, right? Those are signs of emotional intelligence to have those factors. Now, I can tell you right now, most people don't have them all the time, but you're working toward that. Watch that video. It's really actually very helpful. Okay, so what exactly are emotions? We're going to break it down for you. When we're talking about emotions, what are we talking about? And I've seen that word emotion because emotions move things. Okay, there is emotion, a feeling is a movement. You are having a movement through your being. So it's physiological. So it's both psychological, physiological means both psychological, excuse me, it's both psychological and physical, right? So you feel it in your body and it's a psychological, it's part of your thought process. So it's cognitive. Um, Emotions can look like nonverbal reactions. In fact, we communicate emotionally all the time. They say that nonverbal communication, and I say they, it's like studies say, some of them say it's 50% of our communication. I would take a gander that it's more than that. It's probably about 65 to 75% of our communication is nonverbal. And what that means is we're communicating nonverbally, but we're also reading. We are picking up nonverbal signals. So oftentimes you've heard that, right? That people, you know how someone feels by the look on their face. Some people are better at hiding their feelings than others, and some people aren't, right? You can look at someone's eyes. Have you just looked at a person who says they're not sad, but you look in their eyes and you can tell that they're sad, right? That's nonverbal communication. it's really hard for us to, and especially when we know the person well, it's hard for us to not be able to pick that up. Cognitive interpretations. So emotions means that we have emotions when we're thinking about something, how we interpret something. We can have an emotional response. They're also how we express ourselves. An emotion is a verbal expression, the tone behind it, right? Anger, like, oh my God, or oh my God. Totally different emotions. I said the same words, but I said them totally different, right? Totally different emotions behind it. So verbal expressions have them, are the way we think, our interpretations of things, right? They have emotions behind them. Our nonverbal reactions have emotions behind them. And we're not going to do this, but I want you, if we were in class, we would do that. I want you to think about, there's 6 basic emotions, right? It's happiness, sadness, fear, anger, surprise, and disgust. Isn't that interesting? So if we were going to do this in class, I would want you to use different words to describe happiness, what words describe sadness, what words describe fear, what words describe anger, what words describe surprise, and words for disgust. In fact, I think I'm going to put this on a discussion board. So that will be something you can do. Come up with words for describing these different emotions, because we use other words other than happy, glad, elated, right? We use different words for what we think of happy. Joyful is another word for happiness, right? Sadness, bummed out, depressed, fear, afraid, terrified, shaking in my boots, right? Anger, enraged, seeing red, screaming, surprise. Oh my God, that scared me, right? We have different ways that we do surprise. Disgust, you make me sick. Ew, right? Different ways that we use words to describe those emotions. We're going to do that in discussion board. Okay, moving on. So what influences our emotional expression? Our personality is like a big percentage of how we express our emotions. It's also learned, right? We don't just learn it from our culture. We learn it from our family, how we express our emotions. And when you think about your parents, did your parents express emotions freely? Which parent are you more like? Right? Or are you more like your grandmother or your grandfather? Or are you more like your aunt or your uncle? Or whoever is your caregiver or guardian? Right? You don't have to be. So personality is both genetic and socially socialized. It's both genetic and socialized. So you could be raised in a family that isn't your blood family, but you're raised in that family, and you'll pick up certain traits, right? Certain ways of behaving, certain personality styles from that person. So it influences that. Your gender, whether you're male or female, right? Your culture influences your emotional expression. If you come from a culture that is individualistic, like American culture, we're big on expressing ourselves as an individual and talking about ourselves in an I statement rather than we. And if we come from a family or a culture that's collectivistic, which is like a Latin culture or an Asian culture, then we might talk about ourselves in more of a we, or we might think about, if we express our emotions, the effect it might have on others because we're concerned about the group. Okay, that's what I mean by that. Let's talk about high context and low context before I move on in culture. So we're going to talk more about culture later on in another lecture. But what we mean by that in high context versus low context. So high context culture, there's a value on nonverbal communication. There's a higher value placed on tradition, nonverbal communication, and behavioral practices. Like, meaning, the value means there's a lot of information in that part of that culture, okay? So less on the words and more on how people behave and act in traditions and practices. In a low context culture, it's the opposite. It's all about the words. The words drive what we understand about stuff, okay? North American culture is highly low context. It's very low context, I shouldn't say highly. It's very low context, okay? South American culture, Asian culture, more high context. Actually, probably not Latin American. Asian culture is very high context. It's more on the traditions and how you behave and the things that you do in your behavior to follow through on these certain practices that you have say so much about how you feel about the person. Communicate emotions, communicate respect, communicate authority, communicate all these things, okay, through the nonverbal, as opposed to verbal. In North American culture, it's about what we say, how we say it, but that we say it, right? So I hope that's kind of clear of emotional expression. So let's take a step back from that and think about what culture you're from and how that's influenced and shaped how you communicate your emotions, right? How you express your emotions. So I'm white, I'm Irish, and German. On my German's family side, there was a lack of communication of emotions. No one communicating emotions, they're pretty stoic. On my Irish side, very communicative, very effusive means showing a lot of emotion, emotional about things. And so I can be both. I can be stoic and I can be really effusive. I've seen both and I have both sides to me. I'm probably a little more like my father, but I can be like my mother too. My father was Irish, my mother German. So think about that for you. How is your culture, and then I'm an American, I've grown up in this country, how is your culture influence the way you communicate, right? I'm highly verbal and pay attention to what people say, right? It's important what people do, but I pay attention to what they say too and how they say it and the meaning in their words. And there's all of that. So that's part of my North American white upbringing. Okay, gender, female or male, has a lot to do with emotional expression. We've talked about this. Our social roles determine how we're allowed to express our emotions and if we're allowed to express our emotions. It's getting better. There's getting more of an equity between male and female, but still females are expected to express their emotions and males are expected to not. Social conventions go along with that. Social conventions go with social roles and also go with context, like where you can express crying, like in a restaurant. If you cry in a restaurant, that seems like that shouldn't be happening, right? That's not an appropriate place to do it, and it's against social conventions. But crying in your house, that's an acceptable social convention, acceptable context to do it in. We also, what influences our emotional expression is our fear of self-disclosure. And what do I mean by that? Is how we hold back, right? Whether we express or not express, how we try to control our emotional expression because we don't want someone to know who we are, or fear of intimacy, or fear of expressing how we really feel, right? That's self-disclosure. All of these influence our emotions. We're going to stop there and want to move to the next slide in the next part 2 of this lecture.